Hi guys, so forgive us for this budget film, but hopefully it'll improve as the weeks go on. Hopefully you would have read now Daniel chapter 1 together, so you know the story. But just to summarise it again, we read of King Nebuchadnezzar conquering Jerusalem and taking over King Jehoiakim of Judah, and then the best and the brightest of Jerusalem's young men are chosen as captives to take to Babylon. And in Babylon, these Hebrew youths, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael and Azariah, as well as the others, are groomed for civil service and given new Babylonian names. Daniel decides that he will not defile himself with the king's food and wine, and he negotiates with the steward and is allowed to eat only vegetables and water after having a 10-day test. And after this 10-day test, they realise that these four guys are more healthier and more wise than anyone else. So they allow them to carry on for this 3-year period. And after this 3-year period, the king meets with them, and Daniel and his companions are promoted, and Daniel is given understanding in dreams and visions. And so just to summarise on what we heard on Sunday and to pick out some things, and then also for you guys to have some questions and time together to dig a bit deeper. In verse 2 we read, the Lord allowed Nebuchadnezzar to capture Judah, which makes me question why. Decades before, prophets from Isaiah, Micah and Jeremiah had warned the rulers of Judah that their idolatry, immorality and also injustice towards the poor would eventually lead to their destruction. And we've just heard what happens in Daniel chapter 1, but also we want you to look at Isaiah chapter 39 and look at the whole chapter of Isaiah 39 and look at the comparisons between what actually was spoken to 100 years before to actually what happened then to the king of Judah from Nehemiah to Hezekiah. And so God would rather, sorry, that's not Nehemiah, that's Hezekiah to Jehoiakim, apologies. And one author writes that God would rather have his people living in shameful captivity in a pagan land than living like pagans in the Holy Land and disgracing his name. The king's policies in verses 3 and 4 is to, when they invade in a country, they want to take the country that invaded their best and brightest students and gain their knowledge and then turn them against the original people. And so we hear of 3 initial changes that were pressured onto these Israelites. The first, from verse 5, was to be put on this 3-year course to learn the Babylonian language, the culture and customs which would have been against the God of Israel's way of life. And it was to simply brainwash these Jews to become Babylonians, a degree course in changing everything about yourself. This change would have obviously been difficult for Daniel, but he could still hold on to his beliefs, customs and history, but not dishonour God, to draw the line and know where the line is and not dishonour God. The second would have been more hard-hitting. His name was to be changed from Daniel, which means God is my judge, to a Babylonian name in verse 7 called Belshazzar, which means Bel, protect his life, a false pagan god name. But we still read that that Daniel knew who he was called, and he never forgot his name, that his Hebrew God was God as his judge. And the third change in verse 8 is where we see 15-year-old Daniel speak up. We hear the king giving him the best wine and food to persuade these guys to reject their Jewish customs and their food laws. But we see Daniel, this is too much for him. He didn't want to eat food offered by idols, and he spoke up, which could have cost him his life, but he spoke up and he wouldn't do any more because he didn't want to be unclean before his God. He didn't want to be unclean and literally unclean. He didn't want to eat food offered to idols, and he wanted to stay clean before his God. So finishing up the story, we see how bold Daniel was in doing this. He could have got killed. But we also read that God granted him favour through Espinaz, and also Espinaz fears for his life, and so that's why Daniel came up with this idea of 10 days of testing him. him and his 3 other friends, and then in this 10 days they pass the test. God has favour on them, and then they eat vegetables and water for the rest of the time, whilst all the other Israelite boys carry on the way of the Babylonian life. And then God gives these guys wisdom, ability to learn, and also gives Daniel understanding of visions and dreams. And the chapter ends with the king declaring that these guys are more wise and more understanding than any other people, any other magician in the land of Babylon. And so just to finish off with these questions, when was the last time you tested your faith to prove God? Not when you tested God, like when Satan tried to tempt Jesus to jump off a high place so angels would protect him. He quoted Deuteronomy 6 and said, "Do not test the Lord your God." And so it wasn't to test God to try and make him have a trick like a magician or an entertainer. Daniel didn't test God. Instead, he tested his own faith to prove that God is who he says he is. And God would rather have Peters who keep on getting out of the boat, keep on walking for a bit and get drowned and then get back up and do it all again, than have a boat full of people saying, "Yes, God, we believe in you, but we don't trust you." So how can you this week put your faith to the test so you can prove God is who he says he is?